So we're recording, we can get underway, I suppose, then, eh? We're gonna begin with the land acknowledgement. So the land on which we meet has been here from time immemorial. People have inhabited southern Ontario for about 10,000 years, and we acknowledge the neutral people, also called the Ainawanara, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people who lived here when settlers arrived, and who share this land with us. May we together learn to care for and respect each other, our flora and fauna, and the land we inhabit together. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Previous minutes in the package. I'm looking for approval of those minutes. Are there any questions or concerns with the minutes?
A motion to approve.
Motion, second. Thank you. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. We have no registered delegations for this evening. We do have an individual in the gallery. Did you wish to delegate? Thank you. Okay. So we do have a number of updates from LANXESS item 5.1. So we have 4 items to work through, starting with 5.1.1, which is a follow-up summary to the September 10th technical experts meeting. So we'll pass it over to LANXESS.
Sure. Do you want me to go through everything right now? Or
I think it might be worth an exploration of at least the key themes. Do you have a presentation? Is this related to the technical
it just
expert?
was one bullet. So this was about the what we have going on and what's next.
So it would be 5.1 would be contained within this to some degree?
Yeah.
Sure, okay.
Well, Tuesday we have technical experts meeting. Oh gosh, I didn't count how many were there. 10 or so? Yeah, I think it went well. I brought 2 new folks into the team. One didn't make it across the border, and one was sick, so that was the downside. But we'll get them up here to see things because it's so important with remediation site to understand the lay of the land and the ground and so forth. So they will make a visit. But one is doing a little bit, from my perspective, I've asked him to look at the conceptual site model just with through a different lens. He's with Arcadis. His name is Jesse Wright. I've worked with him before. I think he's a PE and a PG, so professional engineer and professional geologist. He really just likes to be very professional. And he is a thoughtful person, right? So he's going to be looking at the boring logs and all of the work that is proceeded at a different lens than I'm able to. Right, and then just see, are there maybe data gaps that we should fill, or is there more data that might help us with design for something in the future? And put that together, and we're thinking in a few months, he will have a work product from that, because you know how much history there is. And then the other person is Cullen Flanders, and he's an engineer, environmental remediation engineer, and he presented. And he's talking about perhaps turning off some of the interior wells. With all of this would be with ministry approval. The ministry was there, the region was there. And so we would let the site come back to almost a natural condition. I mean, we'll still be pumping at the periphery, at the boundary, but just see what happens when it comes back. What are the concentrations in groundwater? We'd be sampling that. We'd be looking at water levels. We'd be looking at the levels of constituents. And then perhaps taking some samples to do pilot tests and bench scale tests to see if there is an enhancement that we could use to make the attenuation go faster underground. Because NDMA, the expert Cullen calls it an amine, which you know it is, the A is for amine. And he feels that there are probably ways that we can enhance and make the remediation a little bit quicker in situ. But he did, and this almost broke my heart because the caveat was still decades, okay? So it's not, there is no magic bullet. You know, I've asked, and Jesse's is with Arcadis, and I know they're working on some very large NDMA plumes in California. It's also affiliated with jet testing rocket, what's it called? The rocket propulsion, right? And there's one site that Arcadis has that has NDMA impacts, and there are municipal wells that are impacted, and they're doing the same thing we're doing. They're doing pump and treat with UV. So there's not an in situ additive that will make it go away. but we can hopefully make it go away a little bit quicker. So that's what we would be testing with doing this. and all under the ministry approval too. Another idea might be, and we didn't touch upon it much, we just discussed it, it's called direct groundwater recirculation. So we take all that water that we're treating and maybe we put it back in either where the source, so where the impacts hit the ground initially, and let it follow the course of the pumping. And that might help flush out some of the recalcitrant areas, the areas where the material is bound up in the soil. But another idea that Alan had is we could put it in the front of the plume, so on the southern side, to kind of push it back to, towards us a little bit, that water. But that's a lot of infrastructure, because then you have to, either way, you have to pipe that clean water somewhere. Because part of me, right, I like puzzles, and what do I have at this site? I have a deep, diffuse plume that we've gotten the low hanging fruit. We've removed a lot of mass, but there's still a lot of mass bound up in there. What tools do I have? And all that clean water, I just keep thinking like there must be a way to be able to use that to our advantage. So that's something I'm asking them to also look at. So we don't have ideas yet, but we want to take a stepwise approach, do bench scale and pilot testing with the ministry and see what is helping us move the needle a little bit faster. I think that was about the summary. Do you want me to go into the rest or?
I think that's fine for now. I think that what would benefit the committee, at least from my perspective, the most is what were the next steps that came out of that meeting. What are next steps?
That's a slide. Okay. So there's still some loose ends that we need to close up, right? I think there are LANXESS did the in situ chemical oxidation test back in 2017. 16-17, and a tracer study to understand how fast the groundwater will flow and if chemical oxidation would work. It sounds like we never really talked about that, so we'll maybe that could be a presentation at another time, but we want to make sure that we're more forthright with information. That the takeaway from a general standpoint, I've read both, is we would need to put in millions of liters of the Chemox solution throughout the community, right? It would be Swiss cheese. We would be everywhere. The effectiveness, the conurbadience of it did work. It helped get rid of the NDMA, but it only worked for 13 meters. So the distance is very short. So it could be a tool where there's still the mass, and in just that mass, if there's no buildings or something. So it's a tool that can be used in the toolbox, but it doesn't have a large spatial ability to clean anything up. So we want to answer some of those outstanding questions. The 2018 technical evaluation report, so that talked about all the different methods for cleanup, that was never finalized. We want to get that to you. And then this fourth bullet is the groundwater bench test and pilot test proposal I spoke of. So that we want to achieve and submit that to the agency ministry pretty quickly for review and hopeful approval, so we can start working on that. And then the longer term outcome would be kind of taking that technical evaluation and taking it to the next step. So looking at remedial alternatives, talking a little bit about cost, which a feasibility report puts in cost and ease of implementation. It puts all of those things together to kind of try to narrow it down. So an example I'll give you is thermal remediation works great when you can hit the material that's impacted. Our materials, so they put probes in the ground, they heat it up with electric. It's very high intensity, but it zaps it, right? It cleans it volatilizes all that material and cleans it up very quickly. But it won't work at the depths that we have. It won't work at the concentrations we have because they're all deeper than that. Like this is the kind of thing that's used in sites in California that were former gas stations that they can spend $2 million on and sell that acre for, I don't know. What's a California real estate number? It's a lot of money. So it's not really a tool that we would use. Like we could talk about it, but it would be ruled out of the feasibility report quickly because of the depth of our impacts. So that's what that evaluation would be. And then the conceptual site model refinement and update, that's what Jesse would be doing. So we're giving him a while. We said June 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if it's quicker. And also part of it would be maybe some data. When we start to do the bench test, we might realize we need to go in and do some focused investigations in certain areas to get, some type of high resolution data in an area. So that would maybe come hand in hand. And then the long term, we call this our timeline of timelines. The long term is working through the new framework for a draft control order. And that's not gonna be quick. Tiffany brought up something I hadn't heard before, that it would be good to get it in place before the elections in case we have a different mayor or something. Because it's such a learning curve to get folks up to speed. And we're going to try to meet that, but I do, it also, lawyers will be involved, look at the writing, from both the ministry side and probably LANXESS side. There'll be lots of community involvement and review. These things are not quick. And frankly, the ministry has a timeline that they need to follow too on it. So we'll try to not be the holdup, but these things do take time. So those are the next steps.
Any questions? If I can just ask one question about the second last bullet, the conceptual site modeling refinement, what is that entailing? Is that entailing some of the new strategy you might consider and what that would do to the conceptual model?
That would be like a future modeling we would do. So the conceptual site model is a living document, and Professor Waterloo did the one in 2017. That's very good. So it's just looking at that and seeing if we have, is there anything different? Do we have a different thought? And GHD also, I don't know if anybody, if it was shared, but the 3D model.
Yeah.
Was it shared with this?
Yeah, the 3D model in 2015 was provided to.
You mean the mod flow or the visualization?
The visualization.
Yeah, the visual.
I don't know what that was, and it was longer ago than 2015.
I thought we did, but we can go back.
There's,
And if it hasn't been, we can.
we're updating, so there's a tool that's kind of nifty. So, Rickard does the plume space shield representation, that's, 1D, 2D. It's flat, it's on paper, but GHD did put one together that shows the borings and the geology a little bit, and you can then see the mass of contamination and impacts. And it moves around, so you can understand like what street is this, where is the mass? So we're looking at updating that too, and that's part of the conceptual site model work.
Great, and that will be then shared with the track committee once that has been updated. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, moving on to 5.1.2 then, summer fieldwork updates.
Sure. So, we have, 2024 is still outstanding. We're having some issues with PW4. Lou can discuss that more in detail than I can, but we're looking at things. I think that the activated carbon change out might be, that will help it. And inspect and clean the air relief valve drain chambers. I think you all really, like, this is a huge water treatment plant. It takes constant O&M, 3 people working on it 24/7, not just it, but also doing the monitoring, doing the rounds to all the wells. So we're always working on it, but then these are the focus things, the troubleshooting we're doing, not the typical operation and maintenance. And then PW6 has been installed, and we're finalizing the power supply and final connections. We have to have certain approved contractors to do all that work. It's a chemical plant. It has to meet certain codes. So we're getting that completed, and we're on target because the installation date to get it running is the end of the year. And then for 2025 is to submit those annual summary monitoring reports and audits for the year before. We have to do a hazard risk analysis. That's part of the work at the plant, because we need to make sure everything's operating safely and we're meeting the requirements of a chemical plant. And then the continuing discussions with the ministry on the remedial framework. Susan, this is, we didn't talk, the tech experts meeting wasn't about the creek, right? It was really specific to the groundwater. So we are working with the ministry on the human health risk assessment. I don't have a great update on that. We had a technical call at the end of August with Jason and his risk assessor. And I am a new person looking in, but I don't feel like we've gotten very far of determining how to complete this that makes everybody okay, right? The ministry says, you know, there's not a big risk here to the creek, there's not a big risk for recreation. And this or that, but they're just not ready to finalize that report, so it's a little challenging trying to get there, but I know we will. It seems like. It seems like we still kind of have a ways to go. We have a lot of data, all of our data is representative and statistically. In line with the samples, right? Everything matches and everything matches the most recent data that the ministry took, showing that it's good data, but they're just not ready to give us the go ahead on that one. We're still working on it. The go ahead and finalize. And then we're looking at the groundwater extraction well target rates. We'll update the Ricker analysis for the groundwater remedy. And I highlighted that just because I also wanted to talk about, Joe Rickard works on one other site that LANXESS has in Alberta, and Edmonton, excuse me, and he'll be presenting his model and what we've done there at the REMTech Canada, which is a big remediation 3-day conference that I'll be attending to. Regulators will be there, lots of different remediation and consultants will be there doing different presentations. So it's the kind of thing where you'll always be learning things. And he'll be presenting our Clover Bar site, which actually we did pump and treat for I think 20 or 30 years, and we were able to stop it, and it helped increase the monitored natural attenuation. I'm not saying the same would happen here, but it was a good news story that he helped us achieve. So that'll be a good thing for both of us to go to that event. It's in October, middle of October. And then we're gonna work to redevelop the PW5 extraction well.
I think, sorry, with that last point, if I can just add, it really should be, we're constantly evaluating all well performances and we'll redevelop all wells as necessary. And PW5 is probably gonna come off the system, PW6 will come on, and this is just a standard kind of thing that's done. So I missed that point, but it really applies to all extraction wells, and it's an ongoing thing. We're constantly evaluating production rates and determining when it's time to redevelop wells as necessary. Okay, so it's an ongoing thing, and it's not just for one location, it's for all of them. If I can just expand on that last thing. Sorry to interrupt you.
Questions, Sebastian?
Yeah, I'm probably preempting here, but can we get some more information about PW4 and 5 and why they're underperforming? They have been for a very long time. And I just received the August results from your colleagues, and they are woeful. PW4 in particular has just fallen off the cliff. And PW5 has not recovered. I'd like a little bit more explanation as to why those two critical extraction wells are underperforming and have underperformed for such a long time.
Yep.
Yeah, if I can, yeah, so I'll start with PW5. Obviously, we recognize and acknowledge that we're at the end of the life cycle for that installation. And the formation is becoming irreparably plugged, as it were. Like every time you rehab, you never get back to where we were before in terms of rates. So over time, it's just we see a diminishing return. So we're at the end of that useful lifespan of that well. We also have some structural issues with integrity on the casing. So we recognize and acknowledge that well needs to be replaced. PW6 is the replacement. So that's the answer for PW5. We're replacing it. The company's committed to doing that process. Doing that. And we touched on when that'd be ready. For PW4, this is a more recent development. It is not hitting the target. We've evaluated the system. We brought in the contractor. We've run tests on the equipment themselves, and the well performance is on the expected curve for that installation. So it's not an equipment problem. We've also looked at the differential pressures, the pressure at the wellhead versus the pressure at the treatment plant building where the water daylights. And again, we're not seeing a big differential, which indicates the force main and line itself is not plugged. What we are seeing are higher pressures throughout the entire system, Sebastian, and we suspect that we've got a buildup of fines in the UA tower. So essentially we're seeing plugging in the carbon treatment system, and it's the wells having to work harder and can't push the water through at the rates that we want. So we had this discussion with Hadley a couple of weeks ago, and Hadley's authorized to accelerate the replacement of the carbon in the tower so that we can flush out and remove those fines quicker. So we're in that process now. And again, I have to tell you, we're always going to be looking at that well performance weekly, and we will be looking at differential pressures weekly, and we'll rehab and we'll do blind cleaning as required. And we're probably going to pull the trigger on those two soon as well. So it is a focus, and we are kind of not completely all the way through the process, but we believe we've got the issue identified and we're working to correct it.
I can just follow up on this. I mean, the actual work for August. Again, the target average for PW4 was 2.9. And that's liters per second. And the average for the month of August was 1.4, so less than 8%. The PW5, its target is 1.8. Its average was 0.8. So in both cases, you're less than 50%. And I don't need to remind you, these are critical wells.
Mhm.
If they are underperforming to that degree, at some point, we are, I think, going to get in trouble. I mean, this is an old canard of mine. I've mentioned this several times in the past. At what point does this lack of flow become a serious problem in containing the on-site contaminants?
Yeah, if I can, again, we're always assessing containment. We're always looking at this. This is a focus, and we are actively working to rectify the issues, Sebastian. And all I can say is that this takes time to effectively, and we'll talk to Hadley, and if there's more that can be done, we'll bring those alternatives up to her, and we'll work to resolve this. This is a priority issue for LANXESS and for us. We hear you, we understand, and we'll keep working on it and update LANXESS and TRAC in the monthly progress reports.
Can I just follow up the last question there? PW6, when is that going to be actually?
The company committed to having it up and running by the end of the year. My goal is to get it sooner than that.
Just want to follow up on Sebastian's point there, understanding containment versus pumping rates. So we've got a target rate for pump and treat that carries on mass, but how much pumping do we need to do to have containment? Have we done any work on that or approximations?
I can maybe answer that. We have target pumping rates that are higher than what we need to do to have containment, so that we have additional hydraulic freeboard, I call it. So I think Sebastian's just shown us what the rate is that we're a little bit, what was it? 0.8 and 1.9.
2.8 and 1.8.
Yeah, that's what we need to have, maybe a point more than that. We are also tracking the water levels in a couple of the key wells, and the point where we actually lost containment was mid-August. When did they do that change? Early August?
Yeah,
So literally that last, it's been underperforming for quite a while, and it's finally now just dropped below the threshold where we've got, instead of 2 centimeters, well, normally we have a couple centimeter containment, it's finally flipped the other way. And I haven't seen that 5 years. It's probably been since I've seen that, and how many times we haven't hit the target pumping rate. So there is there is an engineering buffer in there between the target pumping rates and what we actually need to contain the site. Yeah.
Right, and again, I just want to also add that this isn't an instantaneous type of like reaction where as soon as you don't see the hydraulic containment, the horse has left the barn and it's gone over the hill, and we're looking at the hydraulic conductivities of like, centimeters to maybe half a meter per year type of.
It's probably quicker in that area, but.
Yeah, but I mean, when we talk about those events, they're instantaneous, and now we've got some water movement. But again, we're talking about probably feet per year type of, or I don't have the.
Our containment hasn't gone from 100% to 0. It's gone from 100% to 95.
Right.
So. Like we turn the pumps off totally, then yeah, we have 0 containment, but
Yeah.
they are still running some.
Yeah, and the goal again is to reestablish that flow back to the plant and to pull that back if anything does get. Anything starts to move in the direction we don't want it to, we can quickly reestablish containment and pull things back. It's not a situation where as soon as you lose containment,
As soon as your pumping rates go down, you don't lose containment.
right,
There's a buffer.
and you can reestablish containment and pull contamination back with the rates that we're targeting effectively. Okay, so I understand. That being said, this is still an issue, and we are
Yeah.
working on it, and we're giving it the care and concern and the focus that it needs.
For education purpose, I guess, I'm curious now, does that pumping rate for containment change by season? So if we have more water flow certain times a year, or is it inconsequential in the scheme of things? I'm curious.
You're absolutely right with the shallow groundwater system on the site, like the 5 meter deep system that prevents the shallow groundwater from flowing into the creek. That definitely fluctuates. The pumping rates are very, very high, well, not very, very high in the spring. They're like 30 or 40 gallons per minute in the spring versus 20 in August and September when the driest periods are. But we usually don't see seasonal fluctuations in the municipal groundwater elevations because it's so deep. And the recharge that it's receiving is not directly related to surface water. Ultimately it is, but there's a long pathway before it gets there. So there's a bit of a buffer, but we have seen what you do sometimes see are regional declines in that confined aquifer. So I think about a year ago, we were struggling to make some of our pumping rates because the municipal aquifer water levels had dropped by 1.5 meters. Unfortunately, about a year and a bit ago, they started to come back up so that we were able to maintain our target pumping rates. I really don't know. But it was everywhere across the aquifer, so that's why it makes me think it wasn't something local, right?
Yeah,
It's a good question though, Eric.
I could chime in on that. We saw lower water levels
Oh, did you?
kind of regionally.
Okay.
As of a couple of years ago, and the same pattern, we're seeing them start to come back up in the last year or two. More like.
I was really worried. Last annual report, it was a lot better up this annual report.
Yeah, and we had a really dry year, 2022, maybe it was, and that drove a lot of it, and then the spring. So usually we get quite a substantial snowpack, and then that slow melt will contribute largely to recharge, but there was not a lot of snowpack there. So we had a dry year and then very little snow the following winter. And those kind of, that's our running hypothesis that contributed to those low levels.
Just one more follow-up question about all this. You mentioned the PW5 coming to its end of its life.
Yes.
Do you have an idea of how long the age of these two wells, PW4 and PW5?
Yeah, we have the installation dates. I don't know exactly. PW5 was the last on-site container well to come.
So about 5, maybe it's the newest well, and it's the first one to die.
2005. So
And PW4 was, I think, put in the 80s, but they didn't start it until 1990 or 91. give me a year or two on either side of that.
Right, and not all wells are equal, not all, and again, how wells are maintained. And what types of rehab activities you utilize will affect the life cycle or life of a well.
And the ability to develop it.
Yeah, the formation itself will also tie into that, so it's hard to put like we could put a range, but it really is specific to the installation. And not only the installation, but how the installation is maintained. And I think the region would probably agree that they see that in their installations as well, and if you're talking about water taking wells.
Sorry, that supply wells, tend to degrade over time?
Yeah, no, but I mean, you can affect the life cycle of a supply well. By rehab practices, what you use.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, frequent rehab generally is thought to prolong the life of supply wells. So regular maintenance is definitely the best practice in the industry.
Yeah, my question, I guess, was if we're creating PW6 in order to take over for 5, are we looking at, as PW4 is starting to decline, are we having to look at the possibility of another one to replace PW?
We're always looking at that. And just as the upper aquifer containment system was recently 7 of the wells were replaced. On those offsite wells have been replaced. 3R, for instance, is a replacement for W3. That's for offsite, but yeah, we're constantly evaluating the performance, the conditions of the well. We will video the wells as well during the rehab process to physically to make an assessment of the casing and the screen, in addition to rehabilitating, and those things are looked at and evaluated, and information is communicated to LANXESS, and we'll advise and assess on where we're at in that life cycle. Yes.
Okay.
Jason, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I just had a question related to the ongoing issues with the PW4 and on-site containment. So I believe under the ECA, I don't have a copy in front of me right now, but there's a requirement for continuous monitoring of select wells, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, so you have data loggers in those?
Yes.
Okay. The other question I had was in relation to well maintenance and stuff. Does LANXESS have more than one well pre-approved well technician or company pre-approved for work?
Currently, we have a lot of water out of Paris, Ontario, as our well rehab contractor. We have and are constantly looking for other contractors, but it's not a big industry, and the drillers, a lot of well drillers will do this work as well. But in our experience, a lot of water, this is what they do. They don't install wells. They focus on well maintenance. They have the right equipment. They have the right person training. Should other vendors or contractors become available, we're always looking for more options to provide to LANXESS in this area. So to our knowledge today, there aren't any, but should others become available locally, we'll definitely make we'll provide that information to LANXESS. And I believe a lot of water also, I think they also are used by the region of Waterloo.
Yeah, they're our primary contractor. We have just to mention another one we've used, Well Initiatives is another one we've used. They have done well for rehabilitation work. They were in I think they moved somewhere further north. But they're not far. But they definitely have less staff, and they're harder to get on site, but they did good work for us. It's another option. Okay.
Not every clean water contractor wants to come and work on the LANXESS property.
That could be,
Might be a bit of a stigma there.
Well, it's cross impacts. They gotta keep their water, their material clean, right?
Yeah. I don't blame
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Susan,
Just a few questions. Hadley, do we have all of the data that's going to be used for the HH risk assessment
I think Jason shared the most recent data that the ministry has. Yes.
with TRAC?
Excuse me, no, you don't have it. He's shared it with LANXESS and Stantec. He wants to share it with the homeowners first, right? Like, Jason, you should maybe take over.
Yeah. So as an update for the Creek floodplain soil sampling that the ministry did last fall. So we're in the final stages of finalizing a technical report, which will be shared through the TRAC committee once it's finalized. And number two, once we've had a chance to actually provide the information to the actual private landowners first. So that has to happen first. Then we will share the technical report, the full report with TRAC.
One more question. I think I read in one of the progress reports that because of the problem with the carbon, that the suggestion or the practice going forward is you're not going to use regenerated carbon, but use the language virgin.
Yeah.
So that's the case. You're not going to be regenerating carbon on the site at all anymore?
So the site has the ability to regenerate carbon, and they use regenerated carbon for the wastewater treatment side
I see.
of their operations, and that will continue. But again, in light of the issues that we're seeing, regenerated carbon is, every time you regenerate or reuse carbon, the grain size becomes smaller and smaller. And the amount of fines, there are fines generated every time you regenerate. So regenerate carbon, generally speaking, has higher fine content. And the smaller particle size for the carbon itself makes it a little harder for water to flow through it. So again, the decision was made operationally to go back to the I don't like the term, but virgin carbon source. And to do that for the next little while. I don't know, we may reevaluate,
We want to see if that helps solve the buildup of pressures, right? Is this regenerated carbon just too hard to get the water through? And that's why we're kind of getting a back pressure, and we'll try to go with the virgin carbon and see if that solves the problem.
So about what percentage of the carbon is used for wastewater? And what percentage for the ground?
We do not, just LANXESS made the decision to the carbon up until recently, it was always virgin carbon in the UA tower. It's just recently that we started using regenerated carbon in the UA tower. So again, we want to revert back to where we were with the larger mesh size carbon and increase the replacement of the carbon to try and resolve the back pressure issue.
So you're going to be continuing to.
Yeah, I'm not, we were not in a position to recommend going back to regen carbon, and we'll discuss that with Hadley and make recommendations, but obviously we can't have this continue to be an issue.
Right, this is important.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
any other questions on that, Sebastian?
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit of a bulldog here. I'm gonna be a bulldog. It relates back to Eric's point here. The target for both PW5 and 4 are 4.7 liters per second. Do you know specifically what your minimum has to be in order for containment to still be viable? What level below 4.7 has to be attained?
So we have a real-time monitoring of water levels.
Through the data logger.
Yeah, we have the data loggers and as we discussed, I think Eric brought up, you know, it'll fluctuate as well seasonally, right? We'll have more water in the system in the spring and less in the late summer. And in the winter. So it's not a static. Like the reality is it's a moving target. But that we are monitoring contaminant constantly. And the targets that were established have contingency built into them. And you know, they're what we're gonna work towards.
But are you willing to promote what that contingency is? Do you know what that buffer is?
It, like I said.
On now,
Sebastian, it changes from.
Can we look at the historic data
We can-
and look at when we've lost containment and see what, if there's an elevation, is there a target elevation we can come up with that is typical of losing contamination? Containment?
It's a pairing, it's a well pairing. right?
Sure.
So you know, as the water level changes on the one
Right.
well, the water level will change on the other.
Yeah.
We can definitely look at it, but we're always looking at the difference. We want to see the difference.
But in each well, okay, we'll talk off.
We can, we're not, yeah, Sebastian, there's no, I mean, this well pair dating, the data logger and there's manual measurements as well that are taken, to augment the data loggers. We're constantly looking at the data loggers themselves or recalibrating the data loggers. There's, you know, the data can be provided. I don't think anyone has any, you know, issue with sharing. It's just a lot of data. It's a lot of data. And a lot of information. If you want additional things done with the data, you know, we can definitely do that if.
Look, I'll try to play around and see if we can't come up with something, because on other sites, I've been able to like pinpoint an elevation. The water has to hit this elevation to know when we start to see it in a certain place.
Mhm.
So maybe we can do that in some areas.
I appreciate that.
And again, yeah, sorry, one last point, sorry, I'm gonna make is that with the proximity of the creek being so close and the fluctuations in the creek, that also has an
For sure.
influence as well.
Yeah.
Sebastian, right? So think of it as kind of a moving, it's constantly moving, the target is constantly moving, and I'm not, and we have all the data. We have.
It's a fair point. We'll try to look and see, because on the other site I had, we like set up a warning level, right? Where if we were starting to get close to it, we were watching more closely, we were going out in the field like they already do because of our ECA and doing the sampling round. So we'll see if we can try to pinpoint what that might be.
I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but I mean, I look at these numbers, I'm aligned.
Yeah.
We got 4.7 at the average rate, and you're getting 2.2. And I made this point before, at some point, when do we start to screen that we are now having a reverse flow? No, we're not containing it.
We're doing the sampling, right? If we lose containment, we go out and we do sampling to see if we're having detections in the stream. So there's lots of levels to keep it, keep the creek safe.
Yeah, I hadn't partially sort of responded to it, but my experience on sites that I've worked on, where we've had to establish trigger points. Is like you've got this differential that Lou and Alan were talking about that's sort of ensuring that you've got containment or not. However, correlating that with your pumping rates is really what has to happen. So that there's like a threshold, right, that you can establish when a certain differential is there, that this is the pumping rate that's required to gain a larger differential.
Yeah.
Like understanding that differential does move like.
But the pumping rate could change. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Where, depending, see,
So I think-
they're pretty shallow,
Yeah.
this is deeper.
Creek wells are very special.
So, yeah, okay.
And I think what in these monthly progress reports that I've always sort of been trying to get my head wrapped around is if we had an understanding of what those water levels that ensure the containment, like that's not actually reported in, but the wells, we know the wells that need to be monitored to ensure containment, but the water levels in those wells. and the presentation of the difference.
Yeah.
That's what's not there on a monthly basis.
I understand.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, the way the data is presented, it's like there's this target rate and above and below that target rate,
Yeah.
and that looks alarming
Mm-hmm.
when you see it on the page.
Okay, I understand what everyone's saying, and we'll try to work to rectify that and see if we can maybe look at elevations or something.
No, our target,
Yeah, to see,
we'll figure out that number and that'll be our target.
yeah.
No, just.
Good question.
Good dialogue, thank you.
Likewise, does that bring us to 5.1.3 then, a progress update for the work plan? Or did you incorporate that?
That
into your slide?
was it, yes, yeah.
5.1.4, which is the historic location of the DNAPLs.
I think NDMA, so good at magnifying the slides and then I have one.
And there's just a wire.
Can I just plug in mine?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe has one.
Birds.
You'd be in serious trouble, wouldn't you?
There you go.
Okay, that should work. So I'm Alan Deal, GHD, in case anyone didn't know. Gonna run through a dozen or so slides here. Most of them are fairly basic, simple. I'm gonna talk about the evaluation we did of the potential for another chlorobenzene source in the upper municipal aquifer. Most of the work was done about 2018, 2019, so it's not really fresh in my mind, but I have gone back and looked at the reports again, so hopefully I got the story straight. So before I talk about the source itself, I wanted to do a little refresh on chlorobenzene. Chlorobenzene in its pure form is a DNAPL, which is a dense non-aqueous phase liquid, which means it doesn't readily dissolve into water, and the density of it is greater than water. So what it tends to do is like mixing oil with water, but this oil doesn't float on the water surface. It tends to sink down through the water table and down to the bottom until it hits the bottom of the bucket. The solubility of chlorobenzene is 490,000 micrograms per liter, which sounds quite like a lot, but it's really quite insoluble. One thing I know that we've talked about in this committee before is the 1% rule, and what that means is I wouldn't call it a rule. I call it a rule of thumb. It's if you detect chlorobenzene at a concentration that's at or greater than 1% of its aqueous solubility, so something around 5,000 micrograms per liter, then that could indicate that there is DNAPL up gradient of that monitoring well. So it's maybe not a red flag, but a yellow flag that this is something that when you're doing your evaluation, you do need to keep in mind. This is a schematic that if any of you have read the conceptual site model, you'll remember it, I hope. What it shows is PW4, which is the well that we've been talking about, and a pair of monitoring wells that are located a couple of hundred meters, I think, north of them. OW88. There's OW88, I think it's 8, which is a shallow well, about 8 meters deep, completed in the upper aquifer. And I forget the depth of OW88, the deeper well, but it is drilled through the upper aquifer and upper aquitard and installed in the deeper upper municipal aquifer at the site. So the schematic there is showing a release on the surface and the DNAPL not dissolving very much, but most of the mass of the DNAPL sinking down through that upper aquifer and pooling on the top of the upper aquifer. And then what happens is that will tend to flow under the influence of gravity to a low spot or down a slope. But in the case of the aquitard beneath the Elmira site, there are fractures in that clay material. So if there's enough DNAPL overlying those fractures, they can actually press the DNAPL down through the fractures. And that's why we, to back up just one bit, back when, I'm gonna say in the early 90s, yeah, we did observe a layer of DNAPL in the bottom of the well at OW 88. So that means that there was enough DNAPL there that it was able to flow like a liquid, and it did cool in the well. We purged the well over a number of years, and there's no more DNAPL in the well itself, but there surely is DNAPL around, cooled on that top of the upper aquifer. With respect to the deeper well with OW 88, as I had indicated, there would be less DNAPL. It would be a fraction of the amount that's in the upper aquifer made its way through the aquitard into the municipal aquifer. But what that diagram is showing is there's not enough of it to actually make it down to the bottom of the aquifer and form another pool. So what happens is it gets adhered to, sticks to the sediment on the way down, and eventually you don't have any more free product that will move. It all is just attenuated and stuck to the soil. And then the red arrows flowing in different directions, that indicates the upper aquifer flowing towards the creek under natural, I guess it's towards the, but before it gets to the creek, it's captured by the upper aquifer containment system. And similarly, there's another arrow in the upper municipal aquifer where the flow from the area around 81 or 88 is captured and contained by PW4. Well, did I do?
Oh, it's in protected mode. I bet it's the other one with the
Yeah, I
picture.
think I see you have it on another slide. Sorry.
There it is.
There you go.
So this, I'm going to show this map again, or the slide again. It's very, very busy. I guess, well, actually to look at this time around is the site is the stippled area. The blue, different shades of blue represent the chlorobenzene plume that is emanating from the southwest corner of the site. The left side is the upper municipal aquifer in 1990, based on data that we had that was collected in 1990. The right-hand side is the lower municipal aquifer. It's a little bit later, it's 1998, and by 1998 we had the oxide system pumping. So that's why the blue arrows that are indicating groundwater flow look different on those two figures. But with respect to the distribution of the chlorobenzene plume in the upper municipal aquifer, you can see the very dark blue right in the center there, and just barely making it off the corner of the side, or the side of the site there. Those are concentrations that are greater than 10,000 parts per billion. And there's a little teeny tiny blob up there just north of it, and that's where 88.8 is actually, or well, it'd be the deeper well, whatever that deeper well 88 is. That's the data from that well. And then you can see that the groundwater was flowing off the site in 1990. That was before it was contained. There are the medium blue, I'll call it, where the concentration is less than 10,000, but greater than 1,000. And the blob, the furthest medium blue blob, is where we installed W4 several years later. So the target of W4 was to remove the mass of chlorobenzene that was in that offsite plume. And if you look at the left side, or sorry, the right side, it's the same blue, medium blue is present in the lower miscible aquifer, and W4 was completed in both of those aquifers so that we could address both of the plumes at that time. So in terms of the 1% rule, the initial concentrations at PW4 when it was first turned on were 55,000 parts per billion. So that's more like a 10% solubility. And W4, when we first turned that on, I believe the highest concentration we had in the first weeks or months of operation was 4,400 parts per billion. So pretty much 1%. So those are the areas where we should bear in mind that DNAPL may be present or present upgrading. This graph is showing the concentrations of chlorobenzene in PW4, which is the blue line, the dots on it, and W4 is the green line that's below it. So you can see that PW4 was turned on earlier, had much higher, that is a logarithmic scale. So it kind of looks like they're similar concentrations, but actually the blue line is like 10 times the concentration of the green line or greater actually. So what you see with an area where there is DNAPL upgradient, we did get a small reduction, like it went from 55,000 down to around 10,000 in a few years. And then gradually over the few decades that graph shows, I think we're probably down to 2,000 or 3,000 parts per billion. I don't know what the current concentration is off the top of my head, but it is sustained and it's not, it's a very flat curve. So there is an ongoing continuing source of DNAPL or from a source of chlorobenzene from that DNAPL, residual DNAPL in the municipal aquifer on site. If you contrast that with W4, again, we had fairly high concentrations when we first started pumping, but you can see that they do decline. And I think that's the key indicator for me as to whether or not DNAPL is present. If you can pump that well, and admittedly it takes years or decades, but if the concentrations do decline, then I think I feel pretty confident that there's no DNAPL in that immediate area.
Can you run that up?
Oh yeah.
I'm just,
Well,
like I said,
We'll share these, but
no,
yeah,
no, let me try.
They're also in the revised agenda package that was
Okay.
sent out.
That's right.
You'll see all of these slides in there.
Well, if there's doubt, Al, don't go there. Okay. All right.
I might have to magnify some of the
Can I
others.
just ask one question before you go on?
That's two or
It's
three.
going back to what Hadley said about pumping fresh water, or the treated water back into the aquifer. Would that allow for this to,
collapse in on itself.
yes,
That-
and move the DNAPL out of there?
Perhaps.
Brian, it's a good point. You're flushing, you're increasing gradients. It's like, you're taking the slope, as it were. Like if you start pumping fresh water back upstream from flow, you can actually change gradients, increase velocities to the extraction wells. You can do a lot with.
You can flush it out, but it's not a very efficient process. There's different types of water. There's cohesive water that's like adhering or trying to stick to the soil particle versus free water, which is out in a pore and is a little bit more further away from the matrix, so that's the material that you would be flushing if you added fresh water. You probably wouldn't be getting into the, tiny pores where the DNAPL is. It would be beneficial, but it's not. It's not like if you pump one volume
But
through,
I think
everything's
you're saying
cleaned
if you
up.
put it up to the south,
Yeah. Oh.
that, I think that could perhaps push it back towards our system.
What was one of the things that you mentioned
Right.
initially and as one of your options, and I thought, oh, I wanted to know if this is where it's tying back into.
We're only that savvy, I mean, it's all kind of tests and iterations, right? So it would, if it worked, that would be great, It could be,
Okay.
yeah.
Thanks.
In a perfect world, I hope.
So for the chlorobenzene source evaluation, we did 4 main investigative tasks. The first was to review historic chlorobenzene users to see if there was anybody else in Elmira who might have used chlorobenzene. We identified a data gap, so we thought that we should install and sample a new monitoring well nest in that area to confirm that there wasn't a source of chlorobenzene that we didn't know about that was feeding the plume. And we collected samples from wells and analyzed them for VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And then we also collected some samples for isotope analysis. So in terms of the review of historic chlorobenzene users, GHD reviewed the Environmental Risk Information Services database for facilities in Elmira that currently use or have used chlorinated solvents. And they identified several facilities that had handled chlorinated solvents, including the former Varna Culvert facility at 84 Howard Avenue. So this is the figure I showed you previously. So now, instead of focusing on the blue blobs, what I'm trying to show here are the other sites where chlorobenzene has been used, or was it generated as a waste potentially. So those are the properties that have the orange outline, and there's Yarra, the former Yarra property that's directly west of the site. 84 Howard is it's not a rectangle, but the property that's due south of the one that's outlined in pink. And there's a couple other facilities, as you can see in the to the east and to the south. Sorry, to the west and the southeast of the plume itself. Well, I can't zoom in. I thought I could, but I can't. So the new monitoring well nest is right here. There's not very many wells in this area, so we put it here. The chlorobenzene plume is here, right here, and we do have fairly good coverage here around here. But this black dot is really the only one that's in this whole area of Elmira, so that's where we put it in. And the groundwater flow is generally like this naturally, so there was potential that there could have been a source to the north that we didn't know about. But when we put that well in and sampled it, the concentrations were relatively low. So chlorobenzene was present, and 187-36 was in the upper municipal aquifer and had 13 milligrams per liter. And the -39 well had 0.13 micrograms per liter. So detections, but significantly less than the Ontario drinking water standard, and certainly not indicative of another chlorobenzene source. So we addressed the data gap, and I guess in my mind at least eliminated the possibility of another source, unknown source in that area. So the title should say VOC sample analysis. So there was another consultant, Peritus. That's not their full name, but Peritus were working for somebody who was trying to submit a record of site condition, an ROC, for 84 Howard Avenue. So part of that process involves documenting contamination on the property and beneath it. So they wanted to sample a bunch of the monitoring wells that were adjacent to their property that LANXESS also monitors. So they went out and collected samples from 19 wells, 19 monitoring wells in the upper aquifer, the upper municipal aquifer, and the lower municipal aquifer. And they also sampled W5A and W5B, and they provided the results of this analysis to GHD. So one of the wells that they did sample is called MW45, and it's a UA monitoring well located at 84 Howard Avenue. And this list of chemicals, 1,2-dichloroethane, cis-1,2-dichloroethane, trichloroethane, trichloroethane, and 1,2-dichloroethane. These are all chlorinated solvents that were detected in the sample collected from MW45 at Howard Avenue, but chlorobenzene was not detected in that sample. So this is just a summary of the upper aquifer wells that are in the area that Eric has sampled. The second column from the right is MW45, and it had a number of compounds detected, up to 84 parts per billion for the tetra. No, the cis-1,2-chloroethane was up to 82 parts per billion. So that's in the upper aquifer on the property at Howard Avenue, which Varna were the known a solvent recycler, I guess they were, is what they called themselves, but there were known spills, and it was a subject of a cleanup and other environmental actions as well. So it's no surprise that we're finding that, or they found that information there, for the data there. So this is a map showing some of the wells that they sampled in the upper municipal aquifer. So the next layer down below the upper aquifer. There was enough data that we could actually draw some plumes of a few of the constituents. So you can see there's a benzene plume there with a peak concentration of a little over 5. There's a cis-1,2-dichloroethane plume that's up to 229 parts per billion there in the middle. The benzene is 7.5 is the peak concentration there, and vinyl chloride was, I think, max with 16. And the well right in the center there is, I guess go over and point at it again, but it's MW45 is, oh, sorry, it's MW41. It's their deeper well on the Varna property, and CH70E is literally 5 feet from their property line on the neighbor's property, so practically on their site. So based on that information, we can say that these chlorinated solvents are present in the upper municipal aquifer, but these VOCs are not constituents of concern at the LANXESS site. They're not detected there in the groundwater. To my knowledge, they weren't using chlorinated solvents, with the exception of chlorobenzene. So it doesn't point to that plume under the although it's directly in the flow path from the source area at LANXESS, that plume is not sourced from LANXESS itself. It's probably coming from 84 Howard Avenue. So this is the isotope summary. We ended up collecting 6 samples for chlorine and carbon isotope analysis. And this is useful because you can tell, I'm not an isotope expert, so I'll try to explain this as best I can. These different isotopes can be used to tell whether the chlorobenzene is degrading, because as I understand it, the chlorine is a little more recalcitrant and the carbon gets used up, so the ratio changes as the compound degrades. Another way, apparently different Sources of chlorobenzene themselves can intrinsically have different isotope ratios. So you can have several different reasons why you'll see a difference in the isotopes. Could be just naturally attenuating, degrading, or it could be other sources mixing in to change that ratio. So that's basically what the second bullet is saying, that it's just not one simple transformation process that's going on underneath Elmira, that there may be other processes going on, but unfortunately the data set is very limited, and this was actually done by another consultant, Isotope Tracers Technology Inc. And his conclusion is there that the data set is very limited and it's not easy to establish a conclusion based on 2 or 3 data points. I think what he did say though, that as with the VOC data, there is another source of VOCs in the Elmira aquifer, so that could be one reason why this ratio is changing. And the other reason that the ratio changes that he pointed out was it could be just a degradation process, but he didn't. That would produce one single line as the same process is working on it. The data wasn't like that. The data was scattered, so they weren't able to make a correlation based on 6 points. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Who's the source of chlorobenzene?
Any?
Thanks.
As far as I know, LANXESS. As far as I know.
Second source.
I can't be conclusive about it, but I don't see anything that points to a second source right now.
Then,
Thanks. So I know we're focusing on the LANXESS site, but you talked about a number of other chemicals that are out there in the aquifer. How concerned should we be about those?
Right now, there's no risk. Nobody's drinking that water. It's deep underground. It's not being pumped for use. It's within the containment system that LANXESS has. So I think the thought here is as the chlorobenzene gets addressed, then those chemicals are very similar. They can be treated through the same
Did
system.
they get a record of site condition?
Pardon me?
Did they get a record of site condition?
I'm not
Did they
sure.
do it? It's a question for the ministry too, because it could also be indoor air issues that.
There could be on that property. I know half of the property, I think they severed it over the decades. And I think one of them is the Elmira Theater Company there on half of it now.
I think Jason is.
yeah, I see Jason as his hand popped up. Maybe you can add some clarity.
There we go.
Well, the only status up I can give is, and I double checked with Guelph District Office on this because historical discussions between that property owner and the ministry have been through the district. And at this time, while they were intending to pursue a record of site condition, they have not submitted. They haven't submitted at this time. So.
If I can add, sorry, just to follow up, just to add to your, so from a treatment standpoint, the systems that LANXESS employs at the site to treat the groundwater that's extracted from the offsite water are more than sufficient to handle the current concentrations, and were designed to handle in excess of what we're seeing in terms of dissolved chlorinated VOCs or chlorobenzene.
So if we're sort of talking about future next decades, right? And at some point, potentially using the water again as a drinking water source. So is it fair to say that when the plume is fully contained, when we get to that point, that these other chemicals will not be of concern to us, or will they?
I'm assuming that there's I can show the chlorobenzene plume, but it does, superimposed on top of those. So it's not, they're all mixed together. So as the chlorobenzene is removed and treated, these other things will come along as well.
And those concentrations are not particularly alarming.
I think we had one exceeding 7 Ontario drinking water standard,
Ontario,
and that might have been in the upper aquifer, I just don't remember off the top of my head.
yeah,
Okay,
but
I just wanna make sure we're looking at the whole picture in the fullness of time, even though I know
Yeah.
our focus here is more LANXESS and the chlorobenzene. I wanna make sure we're not gonna clean this all up and then go, oh yeah, but, right?
I do want to point out that the LANXESS groundwater system offsite is focused on the municipal aquifers. On the upper municipal and on the lower municipal aquifer. And we have no influence on the upper aquifer. Which in and of itself, I would suggest is not a usable drinking water source. That being said, the treatment that we're doing is focused on the municipal aquifers, the deeper, thicker. Aquifers that exist there.
So, can I ask one more question then, in the diagram that you showed, and I'm not clear if this is exactly what's happening, or if this is possibly what's happening, but in the upper aquifer, you showed, the chlorobenzene sitting.
Yeah.
And then filtering down through
Yeah.
the cracks, because the
Yeah.
underground is cracked all over the place, we know that. So when we're not treating that aquifer, should we be paying attention to those spots where there's that clump of chlorobenzene sitting?
We're not actively treating it, but it is like a couple 100 meters from PW4, so that the plume is contained, and except for recent few months, we've not seen that dissolved phase migrate oxide.
But that's in the municipal
Yes,
aquifer,
okay,
but you've got, you.
in the upper,
You showed a chunk, if you
yeah, a
will.
blob.
A blue blob, yeah, it's sitting there in the upper aquifer. Should we be focusing on that to help? And I mean, maybe with the gradient difference that you're talking about to help draw it back up.
It's not gonna wanna flow with the water, because it's non-aqueous, and it's dense, and when it hits like a pothole, like that's not a flat surface, so when we it'll reach a point where it's just literally like puddles on the ground.
Sits in the crevices. I
Well-
always kind of think of it as a sponge. I don't know if that helps.
That it does store it as well, but the actual liquid itself, it, like I said, doesn't like flow off like the dissolved plume. And it doesn't, once it hits the spot where gravity can't pull it one way or the other, then it stays there.
Yeah.
I hesitate to bring this up, but when we found some NDMA up at the top of the, where the Envirodome used to be, where the containment building was on the east side, we did have an opportunity to do test pits, because we had a well that we drilled and we found a little bit of DNAPL, and it was only about 3 or 4 meters deep. So we brought a backhoe out and we started digging, and you could literally, it was an area that had been backfilled by LANXESS, so there was this nice clean sand, probably not clean, but it looked clean sand. And then you got into the native material, and you moved about a foot of that, and then there was a clay there, and we pulled it off, and literally there was a pool here, and a pool there, and a pool there, and it just sits there because there's no gradient to push it or move it around. So from that perspective, it's not a threat to other resources, or if we're containing the dissolved phase, then that's both, well, that I think will mitigate the risk.
But back to my simple sponge, what I'm trying to say is it's not soaking in, but it's like, you know how the sponge has crevices all over. So put in something that's dense, like honey, it's gonna sit in those low crevices. So it becomes even harder to get out, right?
But if that honey is dripping down through and clean that crevice. But I think what you've said is there's too many of them.
Eventually, there's no more honey going in, so it
Yeah.
stops, like there's
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah,
It's not pushing, right? But it could be, right? Like with the relieving the interior pumping and seeing where it comes back up. We want to see where the concentrations are now without the artificial pumping, right? So where are the highest groundwater concentrations? Because that would be indicative of the most mass in the system. So that might be where we would try to do enhancements in the future. So you're right on.
Question?
Do,
So it's,
Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Do we test, after you, when you test the treated water coming out of the groundwater, do we test for those ethylines and ethylines?
We do, yeah, there's a broad scan that's done.
They're in the
at a
broad
certain
scan
kind of
post-treatment.
frequency, and yeah, we're, and again, the activated carbon treatment systems that are used, they're effective in removing like
Right.
all volatile organics, like chlorinated, unchlorinated. These compounds that we're seeing, the Howard property would be effectively treated by activated carbon.
And
that
we
would
have
be-
the data to show that.
Yes, and the discharge, again, the creek itself is even a more sensitive receptor. And has lower criteria. Again, our goal is to treat to non-detect.
I'm gonna hazard a guess that those compounds aren't in the influent, let alone the effluent.
Yeah, so.
Interesting.
Thank you. I do
Or at
wanna-
least on site.
Yeah, I just also want to add that when we did the last modeling exercise, and we pushed the model to try and predict cleanup, we did it for both NDMA and for, the chlorobenzene. And the model predicted that most of the chlorobenzene would be addressed by, that 2028 date. Not all, though. There would be some areas that still remain. But again, the model supports the conclusion that for the chlorobenzene, we'll achieve most of our goals with respect to the municipal aquifers.
Thank you.
Sorry, Althea, if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, but am I correct in saying that you said there were no DNAPL offsites?
I don't, there's not a W4. W8 has quite high chlorobenzene concentrations. And I don't think we've seen enough pumping from that well to determine if it is going to decline. But, yeah, I think that goes far a little bit.
Where's W8 then? Where's that again? Is that north?
It's on the Yarra property,
It's on the Yarra.
it's right on Union.
Just off of Union. Okay. But we don't know the concentration levels there.
But we know the concentration. We don't know if it's caused by DNAPL or dissolved phase or
Okay,
stuff stored into this matrix of the aquifer.
okay. Is that the only constant area that we know of, or is there a possibility of being other areas?
In the municipal aquifer?
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
I think you touched on it earlier, like the underactive pumping, there's a source or an ongoing source of contamination under active pumping. You shouldn't see reductions. You should.
Yeah.
You should like if one leaves an active source present on any site and then downstream you start to pump, you're gonna get an initial drop, but then it's just the source is still there. So, and what's gonna happen, as Alan's touched on, this is a
And
constituent that doesn't like to dissolve into water. But this, chemistry being what it is, if you take it out of the dissolve phase, there's still gonna be a source there. And you're gonna drive more from the undissolved or adhered to aquitard or from the pool back into the dissolved phase. So you'll see this you'll reach a steady state and you won't see a reduction.
And the other line of evidence that I like is that when you turn off a well, like that has DNAPL as an influence, you drop the concentrations down, you turn it off. If there's DNAPL there, they'll come up, right? Not, if you continue pumping the plateau, but if you get it down really low and then turn it off, the DNAPL there is going to come right back up to where it was. And we turned off W4 seven or 8 years ago, and it has not rebounded at all. Okay. So that tells me there's no DNAPL there.
So what about the other concentrate here, which is LANXESS?
Yes.
Are they on site?
Yes.
If they are on site, are they also off site?
They're not offsite because any LNAPL on the west side of the property would have remained on top of the water table. It wouldn't have sunk down through the water table and gone down deeper. Only the dissolve phase that's coming off of that would do that. So any LNAPL, the thing about LNAPL though, it doesn't, like DNAPL flows under the influence of gravity We used to think that LNAPL would follow the water table, because that kind of makes sense, right? But it dislikes the water so much and likes the soil so much, if I can put it that way, it just doesn't flow with the groundwater. So again, it tends to accumulate and it'll create its own depression in the water table, and if the water table will sink down, and then you'll get this pancake of LNAPL from a release, and then the dissolved base will come after that. So there is toluene in the southwest yard.
Yeah.
And we had, in 97, we had, I'm gonna say it was 18 monitoring wells that had free product in them. And then we turned on the upper aquifer system, and that dropped the water level. The water table dropped like 3 or 4 feet, and that NAPL followed it down. And as it did, the LNAPL smeared on the soil and became adhered to it. So that by about 18 months after we turned on that system, we were left with 3 wells that had free product in them, and they were far up gradient were the source of the LNAPL.
Is that a concern?
If it was in an uncontained,
For the future,
it's under the plant, so it's a concern to the plant, I guess,
but not.
not to the general public,
Not
no,
offsite.
no.
Good question, Rob? Sorry, I'm recognizing that you may have a question, but if you would like to delegate, if you'd like to submit something after, I can be sure to have those questions answered. Not going to take questions from the audience at this point, though. Thank you. Okay. All right, thank you very much, Alan. All right, so that brings us to item 6 in our agenda, which is the 2028 order deadline remediation framework discussion. And I've asked for this to be a standing item on the agenda because I want the community to keep this at the forefront of the mind. As we move forward, as we're exploring these things, we meet often enough that we should be able to continue this discussion. So I know that Tiffany and I had taken a very preliminary first attempt at drafting up some additional questions. And if you look at your package, you should be able to see that list on page 32. This is a draft. This is by no means a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination. And it was coming out of the agenda of our last meeting. One of those action items was that we would put our mind to developing an updated list of questions that we as a committee think we should put our attention to. So I'm not looking for answers to these questions tonight. What I was looking for was a more of a discussion around the nature of the questions. Are they hitting on everything that the committee is looking to hit on at this point? Being mindful that we will seek public engagement throughout this process as well. I think that we as a committee, though, should at least be taking that first kick at the can and trying to establish what it is that we feel we need answered. So I don't want to go over the questions line by line because, after I kind of took a first look at this, I noticed that you could probably conflate some of these questions. You could bring them together. You could adjust them in probably 10 or 50 different ways. So really just a point of discussion at this point. And so I welcome any thoughts, any considerations. Knowing that this list is just coming to you through the package, it might be a little early to have put a lot of thought into the types of questions that you're looking to have answered. So if it is just a general discussion at this point, I would be comfortable with that as we as a committee continue to put more thought and attention into some of these items. So with that, I'll just pause and see if there's anything that anybody on committee would like to discuss as it relates to this list of questions. Did it completely fall flat? I mean, I welcome that feedback as well, because we can go back to the drawing board and see if we can't tease out some more refined questions.
I could just maybe kick the discussion off a little bit. For those of us that were at the technical experts meeting on Tuesday, I think a lot of these questions sort of got touched on. So I think in a general sense, I think they're really good questions that kind of are the questions that are there right now. I do think that some further questions may evolve as some of the new work that Hadley outlined at the front end of the meeting we'll probably want to see some questions. They'll come out of that work. But as a whole, I think as a starting point, I personally think it's a good start.
Is there any glaring omissions, that members of the committee, are reading through and say, well, you thought about this, or should we consider this?
I think we need to think about what our needs are. We want clean up, but what are our priorities? And one of them may be we just need for water. So how do we creatively be able to work our way in utilizing the families for water supply? Does that help for the region? Or a written system where the communities won't drink that period, so it's all or nothing.
Yeah, it's a valid point. It's one thing for us to involve these lovely plans and what to do with the water, but if we're having pushback from the end users, that's going to be problematic. So certainly an opportunity for further community engagement. And I think that question 10 speaks to that a little bit. Maybe not exactly to what you're speaking to though.
Or, well, maybe just end user engagement, which is what, we're doing. So what are their goals and making sure we're in alignment with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of work for engagement, obviously, and exploring those options. We had Rain last meeting to kind of go over engage water region, and we're hopeful that we can really engage and get some answers to some of these difficult questions.
I think what might be missing here is a timeline, but also we need to push this agenda moving forward, expedite it a little bit more. We don't really have the benefit of time. And not in sort of a political sense. Okay, if 2026 is where we need to have something down, then we've got less than 2 or about 2 years to do that. So I think one of the points that needs to be emphasized here is the time dimension. It has to be done fairly quickly.
And so just for clarification, when we're talking time dimension, we're talking time dimension in establishing these, getting these answered, et cetera.
I think so. I mean, these are open-ended. They could take 3, 4, 5 years for us to follow using the usual procedures. I think we have to expedite it.
That's a fair point, and in expediting, and do you think we need to perhaps remove questions and focus more thoroughly, or do we just need to really dedicate more time and energy to this?
I'm gonna have to review those questions a little bit more in depth, okay, before I can answer that question.
And that's totally fair. That was my assumption based on, people receiving this as part of the package, that this is gonna take some time to digest, right? It's not something that we can just, and that's why I wasn't even really looking for answers, like just, are these the questions we wanna ask at this point? Because I know that was a point of contention amongst some of the members at previous meetings.
And also the procedure, I mean, who's involved at what level? And once that's done, who gets the ball, who gets the ball next to work with? And I think those are sort of the logistical questions that also need to be put down.
That's totally fair. These are very philosophical questions at this point. We need those granular level details of who's doing what, when, and how, et cetera. And I think that's important as well, as per exploring what this new instrument looks like.
And if I could make a suggestion here that we, this evening, say, if there's a deadline for, let's say, a phase 1, where we ask, or we try to answer some of the major questions here. And say, okay, this is what we have as sort of a blueprint, and we kick it to the next phase, which will be another group of individuals, stakeholders of some sort. And maybe go to the 3rd level, which is, let's say, politicians. And give them a fairly concise draft of what is being thought as being remedied, and then they can add their voice. So I'd like to be a little bit more concrete. There's a time dimension here, and also who might be involved in deciding some of these elemental questions. And from there, then we can say, okay, let's move to the next phase.
Are there any thoughts around what that timeline would look like? Are we thinking? And Jenny, I have a bit of project management background, but I'm not going to be offering to develop a comprehensive project management plan on how to tackle this, I think we as a committee could probably pull together a bit of a timeline ourselves. You know, we're meeting potentially 2 or 3 more times this year, right? So I mean, go ahead.
About the technical meeting Tuesday, there was a process talked about. I think we need to be cognizant that we feed into that process, it doesn't feed into us, so to speak. So figure out where our touch points are, and needs are to be part of it. So maybe that's, could be an update we get tonight or at the next meeting. To better understand it.
Is that something for Jason to support too? I'm gonna put you in the hot seat, Jason. But it's, the ministry owns the consent order, right? They're signatories and we're signatories, so.
Jason, you're on.
Yeah.
So what's the question for me?
Like, how does the committee feed into the process to get to a new order? Like, what are the
Well,
touch points?
ultimately, LANXESS is going to have to come to the table with a proposal. If you're not going to achieve the existing control order, what are the steps you're going to be doing and a timeline on it for consideration of a newly proposed remedial objectives? That's going to have input through the ministry, potentially through the TRAC process as well, particularly Region Waterloo as end user of the resource. Once that's through that phase, then we'll be looking at a new control order. Yeah, that's all I have right now. But it's all going to be initiated through LANXESS's proposal.
So I suppose when we're talking about a timeline, that proposal is that fundamental piece. I mean, we can talk about questions that we need answered all we want, but unless it makes its way to that revised work plan or whatever we're naming that document, it's somewhat moot. So chicken and the egg, I mean, are we waiting on LANXESS to really develop this out before we really engage fully with these questions? Or to Sebastian's point, should we really be going full steam ahead and establishing what we as a committee want to engage with the community so that when LANXESS comes forward with its proposal, we're ready to match it with what our needs are? And this is me just thinking out loud for community consideration or committee consideration.
I mean, LANXESS has been here at the table and knows what the committee thinks, and as a representative of the community, it's pretty tough. I think it's, and correct me if you guys think differently, but it's pretty tough for us to come up with a solution to feed to them. They need to feed it to us, and just like editing an essay, it's easier to edit than to create it. So I guess I'd throw it back to LANXESS in terms of timing to get something, at least something initial that we can actually talk about.
I think if we could get that slide that you had probably at the front and
Timeline of timelines.
yeah,
It only has the 1 point. But
or the other aspects of what is going to be worked and the timeline for that, because I think where TRAC has its main role is in the value statements, like understanding what will or won't be acceptable in terms of the definition of cleanup. Some of the value statements basically is where, like, what will the community accept as cleanup? That's something that I think can be discussed outside of some of these other things. The other thing that I think some of these deliverables, these new work deliverables will provide us with is like basically a short list of reasonable options. And to speak to Sebastian's point, the realistic timelines for certain things. I'm gonna pull a number out of it, but 95% of the aquifer meets the objectives. How much longer, what other proportion of the aquifer, how much longer will it require to get those other parts cleaned up? What kind of constraints does the community want to put on those other points? Like, do we treat these areas that aren't meeting the Ontario Drinking Water Act? Do we treat them as a contaminated site kind of way of treating it, like a risk assessment kind of way? Or is that completely unreasonable?
Or institutional control.
Yeah. So like those kinds of questions, I'm just throwing them out as being, these are things that we can make progress on before these other things come along.
So I suppose we both have our work to do in tandem with one another. As far as timelines though, I'm happy to lead the community engagement piece. I can work with township staff to really get that going. And I can report back at subsequent meeting on progress for that. And I'm wondering if LANXESS could put some thought into the timeline and come back with a more defined timeline that really hits at some of those key milestones that I think that he's looking for.
Yeah, I think we had it there by third quarter.
I guess I'm wondering also if LANXESS is working on their proposal for next few years. What questions could we have impact on first? Like there's questions you want input or would accept input on. Which ones should we start with? To help you in your work plan, we'll work on this together. And which ones we wait till the end of the process because they're come later in the report.
Any other thoughts or considerations on this? I know it's one of the more difficult ones to consider. But my hope is that it is a standing item, so we will touch on this in some way, shape, or form at every meeting moving forward. We have enough for now then? Okay. Put that back up. Item 7, fall presentation to council was more of a summer presentation to council. Sorry, that was the spring presentation that we had just given not long ago. We were just a little bit delayed in getting that out, but we are moving forward with the fall presentation, likely come December, I'm thinking. So our spring fall kind of turned into winter summer, but that's okay. We'll get into better swing things.
I guess I'd like to ask, can we expect like in previous years, we've had like what's been accomplished in 2024? What's the work plan? More detailed, like we had in previous years, because we can use that in updated council.
Yes.
Like that's.
Yes.
Yeah, we can provide more detail and share that. I don't think there's any objection or issue.
We absolutely have it.
Yeah, whatever level of detail you require and what level of detail you want to see in terms of planned work for the rest of the year. And well, I think we can provide that in 2025. Yeah, all of that will. A lot of it will be the same. We've got a system to operate and maintain, and we know what those activities are. Some of it will be new. There's a lot of new work on the docket. That'll come up, that'll have to be incorporated as well into that.
So the process should be this forum, and then based on this forum, we provide the update to the council. And so I'm not sure, November or early December. I guess it depends on the timing of the meeting.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to discuss at the end of the meeting too.
Yeah.
So I would say that the spring presentation went well. As we had discussed at a previous meeting, we really focused on the high level stuff. Tiffany came and gave the presentation. Well received. I think the hope, and I haven't communicated this to township staff, so sorry, Stacey. But those presentations, I would love to be able to clip them out and make them available via YouTube that we can link to, because TRAC has our own website now. So it'd be nice to just, all of those presentations that are coming into council, we can clip out the YouTube and make them available on that website. I think that could be valuable to community members who are wondering what's going on with remediation. They don't have to necessarily wade through an entire council meeting to see the 30 minutes that we had discussed that. So That's something that I hope to look into further, but item 7 has nothing to do with any of this, so I apologize and thank you for your time there. We're looking forward to our next presentation to council and what this committee feels is most urgent, what's most pressing, what you would like to see on that, kind of following in line with that high-level summary that we had provided. I know that we had some preliminary discussions on what that looked like. And I also know that there was some talk about strategizing what all of these presentations are gonna look like in advance so that we can kind of tinker with them as that time comes. So, the process for that, I suppose, Tiffany, I'm just gonna ask you, put you on the spot. Moving forward with our fall/winter presentation, we think is the most crucial things that we're gonna be highlighting.
I think the outcome of our technical experts meeting, what's been summarized tonight, those are the crucial pieces. I probably look to Eric who sat in on the meeting, Sebastian, if you think those are sort of salient, current and important things to pass on.
Maybe that's half the presentation, the other half is planned for that. For 2028, what's the process gonna be? That's the two things I think the community wants to hear about.
That'd be great. I mean, half the delegation or presentation being where we are right now, the other half where we're gonna go. I think that makes perfect sense. I'm sure council will appreciate it.
In terms of the process that has been discussed and,
What level of detail are we looking to present? And forgive me, I can't remember, Joe Recker's presentations, I think are excellent, and they tell a story. Have council seen those presentations? Yeah, okay. So I mean, it does provide us then with an opportunity to reference them without going into too much detail. We're talking about, where we've been and where we're at and then future. Okay, is that enough direction to kind of work with? Is there any other feedback that you would like Tiffany to know? Yeah.
Based on what timing, you were saying November, I don't think we need to rush this. Council has to wait next a couple of months and we get a better understanding of the timeline and the process and the use of time.
Yeah, and seeing as our last presentation was this month, September, or was it late August? No, it was this month, right?
no, they don't.
It was late August. Moving forward in November is almost too bright and crow. So
January might be a better time, but like I also know, okay.
We don't have anything.
Because I understand there's like an awful lot of like set things that have to be covered off and.
January is not a good time for council. We've got 4 full day budget meetings.
February? Because
okay.
then we will have the December kind of items on the new one.
I wonder if we, in our wisdom, at some point change the terms of reference to say that we'll give biennial presentations to council. Start the season. Something to consider in the future. Any other comments on that? Yeah.
Oh, just saying what Eric was talking about, half the program being where we are at and half being what we're doing moving forward. We don't have the information from the questions and from LANXESS as to where we're going. How much of that are we going to be able to communicate before in our next meeting, even if it is in the spring? Because we don't have any of that information
Here, let me
at
put up
all.
some slides again real quick. We'll have the slides that Cullen presented to you very shortly. We're working on getting the degradation that we talked about to add that slide. Then, so back to my timeline. I'm sorry, I shut the PowerPoint down. You'll have some more submittals. I'm almost there. We should have the finalizing kind of the older what's been hanging out for a while. And then you'll have the new proposal for the groundwater bench test and pilot test, as well as the updated remediation feasibility report. So I think that'll have a lot of meat in it to discuss about what what thoughts are to move forward and what we're piloting and how it'll help give us information to move forward. And then as far as the control order, that's still a deadline for later in 2025. And when I go back, because the questions, this is the first that I've seen them. Let me share those again with you. Or Stacy, you might beat me, but I think I'm there. I have them. I have this group. So what, like the first one, what legal or regulatory instrument, it will be a future control order. I thought I shared them. I'm sorry. They were gone.
I think we tried and it.
Okay, so are you doing it or am I doing it?
You go ahead.
Okay, thanks, yeah. So the first one, it is a control order. I think that's the mechanism. What specific criteria that I think that's gonna be a hard one to work out, right? Is it trying to work from south to north so we can give the region clean groundwater that they can use? I don't know yet, I think that one is gonna take some real thought. What key lessons? That's almost something that I think the community needs to provide, right, to us. I think if you have thoughts about what could have been better or how it could be written, I think that comes a little bit from the community personally. Ongoing community engagement, I think this is it. I don't know, like, do you want more than the track? Do you want us to present at different things? Do you want open houses? I guess those are also things maybe from the community. So number 5, how should the post 2020 instrument address potential risks that have not been fully mitigated by the original deadline? I feel like that goes up along with 2, right? So what are the criteria and risks? There's not an easy answer. The financial and operation commitments required from LANXESS under the new instrument to ensure the long-term success. I know in the States a lot, we have to post a bond of assurance. I don't know if there's such a mechanism in Canada, but it just shows that if LANXESS went away tomorrow, there would be money there. Set aside as an almost like an escrow. How can the new instrument be structured to allow for flexibility in responding to unforeseen challenges while maintaining stringent oversight? I think that I guess it goes back to number 8. Let me answer number 8 first. What role would the ministry have? I think they're the ones that are overseeing it. And for monitoring and enforcing, it's the notice of violation. And Jason, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the same for 7, right? Like if they see that we have stopped pumping PW4 and we have gross negligence and we have lost containment and we're not doing anything, we get a notice of violation, right? And we don't want that. I don't want that. It's a fee.
Yeah.
It looks terrible.
We're the regulator, right? So enforcement.
That's their role, is the ongoing monitoring of what we're doing. I have to show that I'm worthy and we're following the ECA, the consent order, and then they can give us a violation if we're not. So 7 and 8, I think, are the ministry. How will the effectiveness be evaluated? What metrics? I think that's, again, it's going to be iterative. And alternatives for exploring the water. I'm looking at exploring it. Maybe the community has other ideas and thoughts for exploring it. So we can work on that. I'm always open to ideas. I think the region's looking at some, is it gray water? I don't know if you're there yet by any means. So to reduce water usage, like you could use some water for flushing toilets, that kind of thing, but it's probably not like you would want this. It would set up duplicate infrastructure.
It would be, there's potential to investigate possibly non-drinking, non-potable uses of water, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, for example, a truck washing facility could potentially use the treated water. For example,
Industry, cooling towers.
yeah.
100%. I don't know if that made sense. That was just me kind of brainstorming. Yeah.
I think it just speaks to, the nature of the questions themselves and being in draft form, you're going through and conflating a couple, like some of the questions were just conflated. But I think in having some of those answers available, really helps us to focus the questions that are remaining and that we do need to tackle, and that are those more difficult questions. So certainly we can refine this list even further, as we're working through and kind of meet halfway.
Yep.
Any other thoughts before we move on? We're time. Oh, we're at time. All right, other business. Are there any other items for business? I'm not aware of any, so moving on. We have one.
I think we did, yeah, but I think we had some action items from the previous meeting. And Jason, I think, had one, and I think, Kathy, did you have the other, or?
I don't recall, but I do have just one new item. I meant to put it in my slides. The LANXESS facility has a new plant manager, Rob Arndt. And he's been there his whole career. If it's helpful to have him come in and introduce himself or anything, he's willing to and happy to. He's from the area. So.
Thank you, Tiffany. There were reactions from the minutes.
We looked after already two of them, but Jason had one follow-up item.
All right. Jason, are you able to speak to the action item for the minutes?
Yeah, so the last meeting we had that presentation from Conestoga College students, and during the Q&A following that presentation on NDMA treatment technologies, their professor made a comment or question I guess in reference to the ministry's NDMA drinking water standard, and made comment that it was established several years ago. So as a follow-up, I did touch base with our environmental scientists and standards division to discuss that a bit and see if there's any plan moving forward to reevaluate the drinking water standard. I can say that based on available science today, there is no plan to reevaluate this drinking water standard. So whether it be going up or going down, there is no plan for any changes with respect to our drinking water standard for NDMA. It was established back in 1991, several years back, based on this offsite aquifer contamination in Elmira, as you know. And in 2003, it did become our drinking water standard under our Safe Water Act, under Regulation 16903. So that was 2003. The concentration is based on the fact that it is a probable carcinogen for humans. It is cancer causing in terms of animals based on direct animal studies. And based on those studies and through modeling, it is considered a probable carcinogen for humans. Our drinking water standards based on an incremental lifetime cancer risk of 1 in a million. So for comparison, in other jurisdictions, for example, well, even in from a federal side, Health Canada, 2011, their drinking water guideline was established for NDMA at 0.004 micrograms per liter, where we're 0.009 micrograms per liter. So we're even lower than Health Canada's. Now, just to make since I made that comparison, it should be noted that while theirs, Health Canada's is higher, it's not that we are in disagreement. The problem is not in disagreement with Health Canada's drinking water guideline, but that we want to ensure that ours is maintained in terms of wastewater treatment. So it can be a residual byproduct created during wastewater treatment and chlorination processes. So many years ago, it was a concern, and we wanted wastewater treatment plants and municipalities, for example, to continue to increase their technologies to ensure that it's dealing with that potential residual generation of NDMA. That's not a concern nowadays. The technologies and dosing for chlorination situation is well known. So it's not a concern, but again, we are not considering increasing our drinking water standard. It is established at 0.009 micrograms per liter. And we have no change. We have no there's no science out there that would go against our findings at this time for that drinking water standard. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
So I guess just a reason why I think this is an important follow-up, is that as in our discussions about how the next order should look, knowing that the standard that we're working towards isn't likely going to change in the
Correct.
foreseeable.
Yep.
It's a good thing to know.
Thanks for that context. Thank you, Jason.
Yep.
Thanks. Any questions for Jason on that information? All right, what does that bring us to? 9.2, so we did get the August progress report, prepared by DHD. I think it was included for information purposes at this point. It will be brought up at our next meeting as well. Linda also provided 9.1.1. I should note, a review of LANXESS's progress reports from the months May, June, July. I'm not gonna read them just for the sake of time and committee members, but for those interested public members, Linda did a great job summarizing those 3 reports. You can find them on page 164 of the package that was published. So item 10, our next meeting is scheduled for August 10th. But I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about the fall meeting schedule as a whole. I know that we're scheduled for a meeting in October, November, and December, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm just wondering if we have sufficient business to warrant 3 meetings in the next 3 months. So I'm gonna defer to you for a moment, sorry. What do the agendas look like for the upcoming 3 meetings?
Well, we basically needed to have the meeting on Tuesday to kind of know what work was coming when, which reports to expect. There's a lot going to be coming our way here in Q4. I guess we'll get some things in October. We'll get something in October, which would make a November meeting, makes sense. To maybe see a presentation on it, have an answer Q&A time for it. And then December is usually a very helpful meeting to have because it sort of sets the stage for the next year. I'm actually wondering about October 10th. Like, I'm not sure at this stage. I don't know what we could specifically cover in October.
It doesn't give us a lot of time to, go our own separate ways and work towards anything concrete to bring back for discussion. So what does the committee think? Are we open to adjusting the schedule by removing a meeting outright? And if that's the case, which month would we like to block? Or do you all just love being here so much?
It's the third Thursday night special. All we need, actually, this is a suggestion for the mayor, it's a couple of beers, I mean, I'd be happy.
I'm saying donuts.
Surely we can get a license there.
We would have to.
Well, if there's no pressing matters, October does seem a bit redundant. So, I mean, I don't think there's a problem until November. Jesse does have to supply us with something, and I think if we give him a little bit more time, it would be advantageous.
Yeah.
So November sounds fine to me.
Any objections to canceling the October meeting again in November and probably again in December? We don't know.
It's November 14 and December 12.
Both Thursdays, right?
They're both Thursdays, yeah. How does that?
No concerns from my point of view, and not seeing anybody. I don't know if that's a violent, like, no, I can't make it, or.
No, it's no concerns.
No concerns, that's what I was hoping for, thanks, Carl.
Because we're gonna have a lot of meat to chew on from the documents coming our way.
Yeah.
And so getting that extra time, like in October to actually look at.
Sure. Okay, we'll do that then, we don't need a formal motion or anything, do we, Stacy?
not to change your meetings.
Perfect.
And the other thing that's going on in the background is, the Engage WR, getting those pieces populated and updated, is something else that's kind of ongoing.
Stacy, sorry to put you on the spot, but did you capture any action items that may have kind of snuck through here that I didn't capture? I don't think so, that we really talked about it, eh?
We talked about the other, there were only 4, I think, in total.
Excellent. All right, if there's nothing further then, do we need a motion to adjourn? Okay, we do need a motion to adjourn. May I have a motion? Sebastian, seconded by Susan, all in favor, and have a good evening, folks. For those of you at home, thanks for watching. Next time.
You said,